So, entropy, what is it? The word originally came out through physics, part of the second law of thermodynamics, and a measure of the unavailable energy in a closed thermodynamic system that's also usually considered to be a measure of the system's disorder. If you don't remember that, that's okay. We got to say it so that we know how it came about. But, you know, another maybe simpler way of saying it is the degree of disorder or uncertainty in a system, the process of things running down and becoming more disorganized or random, and the general trend of the universe toward disorder or more randomness. Okay, so today we're going to talk about that both physically, entropy in sort of the physical world, then about entropy with us as individuals, and then kind of organizational entropy. One example is you light a match in a room, and immediately there's this flame, and you know that if you can burn your finger with it, so there's a lot of energy right there. The match goes out. Where does the energy go? Well, if you were in a large room, or you would find it very, very difficult to measure the increase in the temperature of that room. But there would be an increase if you could measure it, if your instruments were sensitive enough, because what would happen is the heat, when that match went off, all those little molecules would get energized and bounce around more, slightly more, but it would dissipate throughout the entire room, and so it would be very, very difficult to measure. So that's an example of this kind of randomness or dissolution of energy. Another one which I experience frequently is I go to make a cup of coffee, but it takes a few minutes for the machine for the coffee to go through the machine. So I get busy doing something else and I forget about it. Then I come back and what have I got? I've got a cold cup of coffee. Okay? Well, we know that coffee was at one point pretty hot, so hot I couldn't actually drink it immediately. So what happened to all that energy? Same thing as the match. That energy, as the coffee cooled off, was dispersed throughout the entire room. But again, very difficult to measure because we're not talking about a lot of energy. If we took a blowtorch or a flamethrower and turned it on for a while, then you'd actually be. It's actually what your home heating system does. You put energy into it, and the room gets warmer. There are examples in in life forms of entropy, in the sense of, like, we start off as two cells as human beings, and then we organize and get larger and larger, these very complex systems, which is our body and our minds and so forth. And then we go through a process of dissolution. And you know the old saying, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. Eventually, we kind of return to the elements. So that's a form of entropy, you know. Great example on a macro scale is the Big Bang. Okay, about 14 billion years ago, we're told, we had this huge mass which blew up and has been expanding ever since, and expanding very, very rapidly, but becoming much more random and disorganized from this huge explosion. You know, we see it also. We know that in a couple of billion years, our sun will burn out. Okay, so all that energy will dissipate throughout the universe, and there'll be nothing left there. So these are all examples of entropy in the physical world. Well, in our lives, we have examples of entropy. Some of them exciting, some of them kind of mundane. You spend a day cleaning and organizing your room or your apartment or your home. 2 weeks later, it looks like a hurricane hit it. That's sort of a form of entropy. Not the physics sense of it, but everyday living example of kind of entropy in our lives. You have a task to get accomplished, but you start getting a whole bunch of text messages and you get caught up and you get distracted and you miss the deadline. Okay, well, that's kind of entropy of your original intent, of your own mental energy, which was devoted to accomplishing something and got knocked off of its course. A few years ago, in 2014, an admiral, a Navy admiral, gave the commencement address at the University of Texas. The title of his address was "Make Your Bed," which seemed like a strange title for a college audience. But it became very famous, this speech and the book that he wrote. And I'll read you a little bit. If you make your bed every morning, you will have accomplished the first task of the day. It will give you a small sense of pride, and it will encourage you to do another task and another and another. By the end of the day, that one task completed will have turned into many tasks completed. Making your bed will also reinforce the fact that little things in life matter. If you can't do the little things right, you'll never do the big things right. Well, this is something that is in some ways talking about entropy. Do simple things, do them well, do them in a very disciplined way. And we can say that in social settings, discipline is the opposite or the antidote to entropy. Okay? It's a way of thinking about it. And of course, here at Amity, we're always talking about, start out your day right. Start off your day right, make your bed, get your area cleaned. If you get that, you're much likely to have a better day. And we know that when people are in their addiction or whatever, the tendency is they live totally disorganized, random lives, right? So personal entropy, in some ways we can see addiction as a form of entropy. Individual entropy, it's self-indulgent, it's isolationist, it's undisciplined, purposeless, and in some ways we're encouraging kind of an anti-entropic attitude in our students. One way of looking at it, or describing it. Well, let's go to social entropy, and I'm going to quote a sociologist. His name is Ken Bailey, and he says, "When I began studying the notion of entropy, it became clear to me that thermodynamic entropy was merely one instance of a concept with much broader applications. I became convinced that entropy applied to social phenomena as well." And that's my own realization too, really realizing that we see entropy all around us, not only in the physical world, but very much in the social world. And there's so many examples of it. We all kind of know this. We know the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. We know the rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire. We know much more recently the rise of the British Empire and then the dissolution. At one point, I think half of the globe was part of the British Empire. And now it is, a much smaller operation without any of that. There's a lot of talk, there's been talk recently in the last 20 or 30 years about the post-American world, because America was very powerful extremely powerful on the international stage for well over 100 years. really shaped in a lot of ways the rules of the world and organizational aspects of the world, the United Nations and so forth and so on, trade agreements. And now you have the rise of other nations who are competing and leading and for leadership and so forth and so on. And you have kind of what's happened in the last few years in America, which is kind of an isolationist period, where we've really backed away from the leadership role that we played. So I don't know whether that's, equivalent to the end of the British Empire or whatever, but it's certainly a phenomena where we see energy coming up and then energy dissipating in a social situation. We've watched lots of businesses. I remember when I was a kid, Sears and Roebuck was sort of the equivalent of like what Walmart and Amazon are today. I mean, everybody, bought their stuff from Sears and Roebuck. Sears and Roebuck is either gone or a shadow of its former self. We've watched Blockbuster. Everybody was going to Blockbuster for renting DVDs. They're gone. Radio Shack, at one point, America Online, which is one of the first online services, was so wealthy it bought the entire Time magazine and Loose Empire, and then boom, So we see these things of tremendous energy and concentration of energy and then dissipation. In our own field, George de Leon a few years ago helped us understand the arc of the therapeutic community. And we made a video about it, which is on our YouTube channel, The Arc of the TC, which really talked about this incredible energy that started the therapeutic community movement, and then how it is kind of dissipated and is not nearly as vital, at least in the United States, as it was at one point. I mean, it's important to understand that this is a universal phenomena. That's why we talk about the Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire and blockbusters and many other examples of entropy being a very real factor in all kinds, not only in physics, but in all kinds of social organizations and communities and so forth and so on. But in our particular field, to maintain that vitality, or what George calls fidelity to the model, is tricky. You're riding a very narrow balance beam, because if you don't comply with outside factors, then you can be put out of business, basically. And at the same time, if you're only complying with the outside entities and you lose your fidelity to your mission and to your model, then who are you and why are you doing it anyhow? Then you just lost that wonderful ability which therapeutic communities have demonstrated over the years to really catalyze transformation in people's lives. To give them a different vision of their life and different, not only just skills, but an identity change is not a skill. It's a revolution, and I think that the therapeutic community movement and model was in fact revolutionary, and the further it strays from being what it really is, the less effective it is. So organization, what happens? Organizations start with a small, dedicated group of people. They're highly committed to a mission and a vision. They're highly motivated, they're very disciplined, and they're very purposeful. And then as time goes by, what happens? Almost invariably these characteristics begin to soften and deterioration begins. It can be accelerated by maybe rapid growth, where you don't have that same zealousness in the people who started it. You can have a loss of leadership. You can have internal or external factors. You can have a change in the environment. Obviously, what happened with Blockbuster is the DVDs went the way of kind of button shoes. It went to streaming, and all of a sudden they didn't shift fast enough to the new model, and Netflix became the new Blockbuster. So what do we think about this? Incidentally, I wanted to add this one thing which I found very fascinating. Somebody asked Margaret Mead, the very famous anthropologist, what is the first sign of civilization? And her answer was very interesting. The person asking the question thought, well, it was going to be some art form or, ways of communication, language development, or, I always heard, when the fishermen start dyeing their nets, that was kind of the beginning of art and some form of civilization in a way where it wasn't just practical. She said, interesting, the first sign of civilization is a healed femur. And what? I said, because it means, he said, all animals, when they break their leg, they die. No, they don't recover because they can't get to food, they can't get to water, okay? And so they just die. Said, with human beings, the first sign of civilization is a healed femur because it meant that somebody took care of that person, bound it up, fed them, and kept them alive while it healed. Fascinating, isn't it? So, in some ways, we're also really talking about not only organization, we're talking about community, and we're talking about culture, and we're talking about norms of behavior being established. The fact that we cooperate, totally exponentially changes what we can do in the world, for each other and for ourselves, So when we look at organizations or societies that are deteriorating, sometimes those are the things that we really see is a deterioration in the social contract of helping each other. People becoming much more isolated and more fragmented, which is a form of entropy, okay? So in a way, some of the things that are happening in advanced countries, we say, are really signs of entropy, social entropy. People being very isolated from one another. The thing we talked about the really dramatic decrease in friendship and people who really have trusting relationships with other people that they can depend on. These are kind of signs of social entropy, which are very worrisome. Okay? Back to Amity. So Amity's gone through a process of very rapid expansion in the last 3-4 years. We have more locations, more diversity in services. We've at least doubled, maybe tripled the number of people working for Amity. So how do we avoid entropy? Good question. So our dilemma is not one that's absolutely particular to us, but is pretty important for us. We're kind of held to two standards. One is to do our work. We have contracts, licensing standards, financial regulations, and all sorts of external standards that we have to comply with in order to operate as an entity, a business or corporation in the United States. Secondly, we have another standard, which is our own internal standards, which speak to the integrity of our community, the commitment to a community as method approach to the transformation of people's lives who come to Amity and our community for help. But without a constant internal effort, inevitably, we end up paying more attention to compliance with the external standards, which are imposed on us. And, you know, those standards are like, well, if you don't do this, you're not going to get paid. Therefore, you're going to go out of business. Therefore, you're going to pay attention to these things. And so those things have a compelling interest for us, of course, but they tend to subsume our own attention to our own standards, which are not forced on us by outside entities, are strictly our vision and our mission and our picture of who we are and what we're doing. And if we don't pay attention to our own internal standards, then we are involved in the process of entropy, you know. And sooner or later we start looking like everybody else, you know, who's in social services. And we look like the licensing standards, okay. So what's our task? We've got to stay focused on our mission and our vision and our commitment. Our commitment is we're not just in the business of ameliorating symptoms. People come to us, they're troubled. Their lives are a mess. They have problems in almost every arena of their life. Physically, they're not healthy. They often have addiction problems. They've been involved in many times in relationships that are very difficult, and some of them involve abuse of one form or another. They've come from family situations which have been far from ideal, from neighborhoods that are dysfunctional, and so people come with this bundle of problems, not just one issue. And instead of trying to just ameliorate their symptoms, which is what a lot of social service agencies are doing, some cases trying to remove a symptom, but in many cases just ameliorating it. So you feel better, okay, or in terms of people and criminality, you're less of a problem in the community than you were before. But we actually have set our standards much higher. We've said, we are interested in transforming your life, a real change of identity, so that you really walk away a different person or on your way to becoming a different person with a different identity, you know. That's a much higher bar to reach. And we're not, the contracts that we get don't tell us that's what they want. They're much more interested in ameliorating the symptoms. But we've set this higher bar, and that standard is really important. And if we are focused on that standard, it makes us work a lot harder at becoming a real community, because the process we use to transform lives is a community as method approach. You know, we're not doing this by individual what they call the therapeutic dyad. I'm the counselor, you're the patient. This is much more of a catalytic experience within a community. So, you know, one of the first things in this is membership. You know, the community, the word community is so often misused that it's almost become meaningless. You know, the community of Los Angeles Dodgers fans, what does that mean? Even saying communities of color, which has become a kind of a common TV term, which lumps everybody who's not white as in community, which is completely, we know that's not true, okay? They may share some opinions and thoughts and experience due to racial prejudice, but that doesn't make them a community. It makes them much more aware of certain issues, and perhaps they would come together on certain issues. You know, we talk about you know, the people who go to a baseball game or a football game and sit in the stands, and they're all wearing all the gear for their team, are just as likely to have a fight in the parking lot with each other as they are with members of the other side of the fans. You know, it's not really a community. Community before we watered the word down to meaninglessness really meant people in very close contact with each other, with agreed upon norms and expectations of each other. And that's what the kind of community we're talking about, we're trying to achieve at Amity means. And that means that everybody is first a member of the community before they are an employee or a student, you know, a faculty member or a student. And that means that everybody has a role, not just a job to do. Everybody is both a teacher and a student. And probably the most radical aspect of this is recognizing that a community that is dedicated to transformation transforms everyone, okay? That those who are the transformers are transformed as well, okay? Not just the students, but the faculty are all in the process of transformation. And even if they are, quote, considered to be healthy and functional, which we hope they all are, nonetheless there is a change in identity and a transformation process, because learning means transformation. Okay. And we've talked about Amity as a teaching and therapeutic community. So with all this said, to kind of wrap this up, talking about entropy, what do we do? Well, we as human beings, as living entities, we sort the mail, we build sandcastles, we solve jigsaw puzzles, we separate wheat from chaff, we rearrange chess pieces, we collect stamps, we read books and alphabetize books, we create symmetry, we compose sonnets and music, and we put our rooms in order. So all these are kind of anti-entropic activities. All of us living creatures propagate structure, not just human beings. And we know that, you know, all these lower animals, you know, all these companions we have in the world that we live in, organize themselves and have their own rules and norms for behaving, even in the insect world or schools of fish. They figure out how to organize and not be randomized. We are delighted when we see these wonderful things of thousands of birds flying around like this. Well, that is the antithesis of entropy, you know. So, you know, it would be kind of ridiculous to try and come up with a thermodynamic explanation or measurement of building sandcastle or writing a book, or of those birds in that wonderful spiral that they're doing, or fish in these huge schools. But it's not absurd to say that we're reducing entropy, little by little, bit by bit. Not only do living things reduce the disorder in the environments that they're in, we are, in fact, miracles of pattern and structure, okay? It really, so when we talk about entropy, and which is inevitable, it's just a rule. It's like gravity. It's not something where we can't overthrow gravity and we can't overthrow entropy. But we can understand it. We can understand perhaps even our purpose in the universe could be considered, we are the anti-entropic force. You know, we are if entropy is the alpha, then we're the omega. And that's a nice way to think about our lives, to think about the organizations and communities that we create and we belong to, and that we work so hard at preserving